Hello and welcome to What's Coming and How to Prepare, Mytech's 2023 IT forecast. This year we took a slightly different tack than we did from last year, which is where we decided to, instead of giving you some things that we feel are going to be pretty common, we actually felt that we wanted to take the approach of 4 must-haves for your organization in 2023, that if you're going to make sure that you have certain things in place, these are the 4 things we really believe you need to have in place and you should be working on in 2023 if you don't already have them in place. We also wanted to provide some insights for 2024, and I also have noted those as honorable mentions for 2023, so that it doesn't mean you shouldn't work on them in 2023, we felt that they weren't must-haves for 2023, and we really wanted to delineate that. So those are the quick takes for today. By the way, I'm Nate Austin. I'll be guiding you through today, and Stephanie Kingsley is behind the scenes producing. So go ahead and please, throughout the session, use the Q&A panel and add some questions, and we look forward to either answering them after the fact or potentially offline throughout the session. With that said, we always like to hit 1 minute about Mytech. We are a business and consulting organization working with small, medium businesses. We have determined and we have found and we developed a proven IT strategy that we've worked on for over the last 22 years that delivers consistent and reliable results for our clients. Hopefully it removes IT challenges so that you can focus on serving your customers better, as well as being more adaptable to all the other challenges that we as businesses inevitably face. And together with our clients, they can achieve 4 times more value and productivity from their IT investments. If you'd like to learn more about how we do that with our clients, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and raise your hand and let's have a chat, but that's not why you're here today. So we are going to move on to the 2023 IT forecast. Okay, so today, first and foremost, we're going to hit on the 2022 in review. As I mentioned, we took a little bit different tack this year, so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll look at 2023 and really the 4 must-haves. And then we'll hit on the 2024 on the horizon, like I mentioned, but also there's some 2023 honorable mentions, or hey, these are some things that we're seeing coming up in 2023 and that it might be applicable to your organization sooner than later. And finally, we'll open up for some Q&A and some recommended action items at the end. All right, 2022 in review. I appreciate it that when we were collaborating on this, we're like, did we get it right? Maybe it'd be worth to have a quick review of the last year. So we kind of had 2 major categories of forecasts in 2022. We talked about enabling the hybrid work environment. There's a lot of ways in which organizations, not just us, but organizations have historically operated that haven't always been conducive to hybrid work. So one of them being the conference room experience, the fact that if you are all in the office or all remote, that was fine. But when you get people where you have some people in the office and some people that are remote, and then trying to have a quality conference room experience, it can be challenging. So that is definitely something that we saw has been a major trend in the last year, this year, and we're seeing more and more organizations look to update that technology to enable the hybrid work for conference rooms. Same thing with remote access. We've seen more and more folks try and figure out how to go to SharePoint, use Teams better, maybe use OneDrive better, how they can get rid of VPNs, those kind of things. So we've definitely seen that trend pretty strong in 2022. This next one, we've seen more of a partial need or partial adoption. Some organizations had already done it, but looking at your phone system, so that is your organization and your phone system and your communication tied to a handset that sits on a desk, as opposed to being able to go wherever your team goes, whether it be with a mobile device or their laptop or desktop. So we've seen some of this, and again, sorry that yellow doesn't show up that great, but I didn't want to show orange, so I don't know, I picked yellow. But that's something we've seen more of, and I do think that more of that's to come, but we're not going to spend much time on that today at all. And then finally, under enabling hybrid work, this is similar to the remote access frustrations, is that people are tired of the VPNs. Organizations are looking at when their life cycle of their physical server or servers are up for replacement, and they're saying to themselves, I don't want to buy another $10,000 server. Are there things that I can be doing to not have my physical assets and applications and files relying on a physical device in my physical location. And so planning through some of those things, again, I put the yellow on that because the organizations that have their servers up for replacement in 2022 definitely looked at this, but we have definitely others that are looking into the future as their servers have a longer life cycle than 2022 or 2023. So, but still, I think we did okay in kind of forecasting at least the hybrid work environment. The next one that we talked about last year is really around security. Again, we generically said IT security standards are going up, and there are a lot of reasons for this, and we provided a lot of data last year as far as why this is happening from the FBI and CISA and other organizations. But ultimately, we definitely recommended MFA, and that's been recommended for years. And I'm going to hit on that again as a foreshadowing, but definitely saw increases of ransomware. Passwords can easily be hacked. If you haven't implemented MFA and single sign-on, it's really not a nice to have anymore. Again, like I said, I'll keep that for my 2023 must-haves because that's in there. The other one that we identified is identify, mitigate, risk, and preparedness. This really gets into, we're seeing a lot of cyber liability insurance providers want to see you, not require it per se, but we're seeing some start to require it. And then some industries, depending on the industry that you're in, are starting to require, are you doing a security risk assessment? Are you writing policies that define how you're handling technical and physical administrative controls? So this is where the recommendations we made last year are information security assessment and kind of building a roadmap for that, as well as evaluate, update, or document policies. We spent some time on that this year, but I gave it a yellow because it didn't really ubiquitously apply to all organizations, although I do think that if you're in regulated industries or industries where you're getting pressure from clients or vendors, this is definitely something that applies to you. The next one, where we said legacy security is not enough, we really hit on how, again, we still want to have, this traditional items from a security perspective. However, we definitely saw more cyber liability insurance we're requiring, as well as wanting to as well as just to be able to protect yourself against current threats. Having managed an endpoint detection and response in place, MDR, EDR, was really an important thing. So that's something that for our clients, if you're one of our Smart Business Suite clients, we automatically deployed that this year as part of, we knew that was coming, and so as part of our forecast, we automatically deployed that this year for our clients that are on our Smart Business Suite program. Then proactive identification of security issues. This is one that I think we're seeing gain momentum. I'm going to give it a yellow, mainly because it's security information event management, SIM or SIEM. I've heard different people pronounce it different ways. We're definitely seeing if you have vendors that require it, or if you're in an industry that you work with certain clients that require it, we're seeing those requirements, but it's not happening across the board yet. This is something that, again, it's gaining momentum. It's a quality security program and tool, but it's also kind of expensive. And so we're not seeing mass adoption of that yet, even though we kind of had some honorable mentions because it was coming from cyber liability. We saw that happening, and we do think in the future years that will happen too. But right now, it wasn't as strong of a hit in 2022 as we had potentially thought last year. Okay, so that's kind of how we did in 2022. We were about 50-50 on greens. We didn't have any reds. There were definitely some greens where it was across the board, and yellows that were kind of dependent on your industry. But overall, I think we did a decent job on hitting the mark from last year. If I may, pat myself or ourselves on the back. So all right, let's dig into why you're here. 4 must-haves for 2023. Again, I think this is something that some of these are things that your IT provider, like if you're working with Mytech, will or should be already providing. And some of these I think you should probably already have in place. But really the intent of why we wanted to hit on 4 must-haves in 2023 is if your organization does not have these technologies in place or does not have these pieces in place, we would strongly recommend, based on everything that we're seeing across our industry, collaborating with peers, attending like Vistage meetings, working with cyber liability and security professionals. These are the 4 components that we believe are going to be critical for your organization in 2023. And again, some of you might already have these in place because the very first one is, surprise, surprise, multi-factor authentication. There are still some organizations that do not have multi-factor authentication in place. We even know of an organization who looked at their premiums and they said, well, our premiums are less are incrementally less expensive than if we had to pay for MFA, so we're going to do the premiums. It's not an and, it's not an or, it's an and. If I may be so blunt and bold, MFA is so critically important. I mean, basically, for those of you, if you don't understand what it is, it adds an extra layer of authentication that hackers, it says, will not be able to on the quote here, but in general, it's highly unlikely that they're going to be able to get into your system with MFA unless they're doing some very sophisticated targeting. But if you don't have MFA in place, they don't even need to use some of that sophisticated targeting. You're pretty easy to get access to. The other thing is, with more and more people working remotely and using different devices, MFA can really ensure that a bad actor is not gaining access to your data on other devices as well. So those are some of the key things that's important. Let me show you some data that really also supports why this is really important. So first of all, did you know that 81% of breaches are caused by credential theft? And then 73% of passwords are duplicates. So when you hear about a lot of these data dumps and these data breaches that are out in the wild, Experian was one of them. You know, there's one almost every week, and this, I think, why this has become numb to people as far as like, well, what can I do about it? Because all this stuff happens all the time, or maybe it's not going to affect me, or it hasn't affected me yet. Well, the reality is, without MFA, these data breaches, it gives bad actors a bigger and bigger data set of passwords to attempt and try to hack your system. And if your organization does not have anything other than a username and password, the likelihood of them getting in is very, very high. So, but adding MFA, it can prevent over 95% of bulk phishing attempts, and it can prevent over 75% of targeted attacks against your organization. There's rarely a single piece of security that you can add to your environment that can have this level of impact and have that such a dramatic difference in being able to protect your organization. Even to the point where if you are refusing to do multi-factor authentication and are choosing to work with us, we actually have you sign an acknowledgement and transfer of risk document. Our cyber liability is asking us to make sure that we're advising our clients for these things. And if our clients are choosing not to implement these technologies, not only this technology, but other security recommendations, they want us to make sure that we have this document in place so that when something happens to you, we have a get out of jail free card that says you can't come back and go after our cyber liability policy to claim that we didn't do our job. So this is, I can't emphasize this enough. As far as if you don't have MFA in place, and for those of you who have MFA, I'm sorry that I'm going on this diatribe, but for those of you who do not have MFA, please, 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 I don't want to see something bad happen to your organization. Get it in place next year and as soon as possible. Okay, getting off that MFA soapbox. Second, endpoint detection and response. We put this on here because for Mytech's Smart Business Suite clients, we have already deployed this. This is already in place. This protection is already there. But you know, for those of you who are not our clients or our Smart Business Suite clients or on our Smart Business Suite program, which we rolled out 5 years ago, this is a protection that you really, really, really want to have in place. It takes the level, like all those, as I mentioned earlier, the antivirus, the spam filtering, the firewall, all those kind of things. The attacks are getting so much more sophisticated. In fact, we recently had a client where an end user downloaded something that was really malicious. It was really bad. They thought they were downloading something good, but it actually was coming from, they'd been kind of fooled to go to a different site to download this tool, and it ended up being something very, very bad. And endpoint detection and response caught it, was able to catch it before it did anything bad. We're able to mitigate the risk, isolate the issue, and not have it be a wider challenge or problem for the client. This is the best way right now moving forward for having this another layer, another tool that you really should be having in place in your security portfolio to help keep your organization and your data safe. So here's a couple of reasons. One, again, as I mentioned, current threats require sophisticated protections. The legacy protections are not good enough. They still need to be there, but are not good enough to stop the current threats that are out there in the wild. And secondly, and I made this one green because it's not such a security piece, but we're also seeing, and this is why one of the reasons why it also raised to the elevation of a 2023 must-have, is because cyber liability insurers are starting to require EDR for underwriting. They're also requiring MFA, by the way. So if you don't have MFA, we've even seen some cyber liability policies or underwriting say, look, don't even submit your cyber liability application unless you have MFA enabled and turned on. So EDR, we believe, is another one of those that probably in 2023, if you do not have EDR, you might not be able to be eligible to renew your cyber liability policy or to get a new cyber liability policy. So that's EDR. I'm not going to go into too much of the technical nuances of that, but that's number 2. Number 3 on the list, even though this is not something Mytech provides and we are not an insurance provider, cyber liability insurance. This one is we've seen organizations, unfortunately, that have had an incident that did not have cyber liability insurance in place, and the recovery of these incidents is not covered by your general liability policies. It's not covered by a cyber rider. You need to specifically have cyber liability insurance. So again, recovering from a cyber event is expensive, and there are certain variables that a cyber liability policy can help you with, such as having a breach coach, which is typically a specialized attorney, lawyer that knows how to handle these situations and knows how to make sure you're communicating appropriately and not putting yourself in a bad legal position. Secondly, also cyber forensics, typically to know whether or not you got everything out, or to know whether or not it's a reportable incident, or if there's other legal things you need to be worried about. Bringing in cyber forensics or cyber specialists, which is not your internal IT and typically not your managed services provider like Mytech, to help do those things. Those people are expensive. We get quotes for $450 an hour and more, as well as minimums of $10,000 or $15,000 just to start. So these are things that cyber liability will cover and cyber liability will help you with when you have to deal with an incident. And unfortunately, I am using the word when, not if. The reality is that it's very likely that all of us will go through an incident if you haven't already, and having these pieces in place, having cyber liability in place, will definitely put your organization in a better position to be able to recover, navigate and recover from a cyber incident. Which leads us to number 4. The number 4 must-have for 2023 is an incident response plan, or an IRP. The reality is, when you have an incident, time is of the essence. It matters whether or not you're responding in hours or days. If you have an incident, responding in hours versus days can dramatically change the outcome and the damage and your recoverability of an incident, which is why we don't recommend figuring out the plan during an incident, because doing that wastes time. If you don't have a plan figured out, you will fumble around and waste time that could cost you more and more money and more damage, and make it harder and harder to recover from a cyber incident. So we've also found, working with cyber liability insurers, and when we've had to deal with a handful of incidents, unfortunately in the last year or two, that handling incidents incorrectly could put you in legal trouble. So that's part of the reason why you want to have an IRP plan and know who your breach coach is, know legally who you're going to be dealing with, depending on the impact of the incident. As well as handling incidents correctly could violate, or incorrectly, could violate your cyber liability policy. Some insurers want to specify whom you use to recover or to do the forensics of an incident. And again, typically that is not your internal IT and not your managed services provider. So one of the reasons why this is really important is because if you have your internal IT or your managed service provider act in this capacity, they might violate your cyber liability policy, which could then limit your coverage and your potential payout of your policy. So again, the reason why we're saying have an incident response plan is because not having one can cause you delays, which can cost you money, and not understanding how to handle them, you can incorrectly handle it, which could also invalidate your policy, which is intended to help you pay for all these expensive things. So the other thing is, we're saying as a final kind of note there, is that again, we're not cyber liability insurers, but we're seeing this that many cyber liability policies, we believe, will soon require an incident response plan in order to be eligible, in order to have underwriting, and or it might reduce your premium if you demonstrate that you have an effective IRP plan. So those are the 4 must-haves. That hopefully didn't scare you too much, but now we're going to get into the 2024 on the horizon, as well as some 2023 honorable mentions. What I mean by the honorable mention part is that it didn't bubble up to the point of the must-have, and that's why we wanted to really hit on the must-have. You really should do those 4 things. But if you already have those 4 things or already work on those 4 things, these are some other variables that we really see on the horizon, or that we're seeing a lot of organizations more strongly look at or consider or are trying to figure out how to do in 2023. But definitely we feel like going into 2024, these things are going to be more of a necessity than a nice to have, and not just from a cyber liability perspective, which we'll touch on that in a minute, but also from a just organizational use of the technology that you're investing in and the productivity, and be able to hire and retain and attract talent. Some of these things relative to productivity are something that you shouldn't necessarily wait for 2024 to work on, but just know that they're out there. So without further ado, application vulnerability management sounds really complex. Here's really what that means. Look, all systems, your laptop, your desktop, your phone, your software applications that you use, all of those, your ERP, your CRMs, your financial programs, etc., all of them are based on code. Code is never perfect. There are known and unknown vulnerabilities that code has. So the trick is that once a vulnerability becomes a known vulnerability, then those vulnerabilities need to be fixed, because those vulnerabilities are typically how bad actors can infiltrate your system, whether it be your finances or your CRM or your servers or other applications or your email. And so making sure that you are on top of those vulnerabilities is one of the best ways in which you can also mitigate against bad actors using those vulnerabilities against you. Also, here's one of the other reasons why this one didn't bubble to the top for 2023, but we believe is something that's on the horizon for 2024 is, we believe that cyber liability is going to start requiring this. Look for your renewals. And one example that we saw recently, we saw that cyber liability insurance had an addendum that said if you have known vulnerabilities in any software or system in your environment that you use, and if you don't address it, once that vulnerability is known, you have a certain amount of time to mitigate it. And so, for instance, between 0 and 45 days, if you don't address it within 45 days, your coverage might go down by 25%. If you don't address it in 90 days, it goes down another 25%. If you haven't addressed it in over a year, your coverage could drop to 10%. And this is an example, it dropped to 10%, and you had to self-insure the first 25% of the payouts. So it's a major change, and cyber liability is starting to leverage these types of vulnerabilities as far as you're making it your responsibility so that you can make your cyber liability policy coverage stay intact. And so again, that's the last bullet, which is cyber liability coverage is being tied to timely resolution of known vulnerabilities. So for Mytech's Smart Business Suite clients, we are actually rolling out an application vulnerability management system in 2023. So you are already covered. You don't have to worry about this. We are handling this for you for for vulnerability management. We will collaborate with you because it is everyone's responsibility. We want to make sure that if there's anything that we can't get through our systems, that we're collaborating with you to do that. But this is going to be a very important thing, we believe, in 2023, so that going into 2024 is probably going to be a requirement from a cyber liability perspective. So that's what we mean by application vulnerability management. The next one that I want to bring to light, we want to bring to light, is data loss prevention, or DLP. You're probably hearing some about this. We have several clients that are really strongly looking at this technology. And what data loss prevention is looking at saying, hey, what does your organization have sensitive and confidential data? Sometimes that's defined for you by the industry you're in, like HIPAA or FINRA, et cetera. But the idea is that you define different categories of data So like this data is really confidential, this data is sensitive, this data doesn't really matter. Again, hypothetically speaking, probably all data really matters, but getting some different levels. Writing a policy to say, well, if data is sensitive, I want to treat it this way. If data is confidential, I want to treat it that way. And then implementing technical controls, which is effectively the data loss prevention methodology, to say, okay, if this data is sensitive, people can share it, but they can't print it or download it. But maybe if data is confidential, they can't even share it. Like the policy will prevent someone even attaching that document to an email or trying to send a link via an email or something like that. It'll prevent that information from even leaving the organization in any way, shape, or form by policy. So that's what we mean by data loss prevention, is that really trying to take putting tighter controls around the data that should not leave your organization, or that you should have more tighter controls around to prevent loss. Again, so data loss prevention. So again, we're seeing organizations look at this and work on this. We have some projects with clients working on this initiative. And again, I don't know how much of it's going to be like a must-have. We didn't think it was bubbling up to that level, but definitely if you're in compliant industries where you have regulatory compliance, this is something that's probably going to be a stronger consideration in 2023 and definitely 2024. And other organizations, depending on where you're at, might be needing to do this now. So we wanted to make an honorable mention of that, but also know that that is one of the next things that we're seeing folks work on as they go down the security journey and path. Finally, we wanted to look, we've seen over the last several years, especially the pandemic, but that collaboration and productivity and task management improvement has been a huge pain point for so many organizations. The pandemic forced everyone into figuring it out. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations this year, in the last couple of years, as well as moving forward, where they're saying, I need to reevaluate how our team is using these systems. We're paying for all these Microsoft 365 solutions, but are we using them well? So let's assess to make sure that our structure and our design is fit for use. How can we improve the navigation so it makes it easier for new employees to find the information they need, or for existing employees to find what they need by using navigation and with SharePoint and hub sites? There's a lot of collaboration capabilities in SharePoint and Teams that are not being leveraged effectively today, but there's also improved productivity by using some of the integrated task management and project management tools that are built in your 365 suite as well. And finally, this is one of the major changes that we've seen in really 20 years of how systems really, or Microsoft systems in particular, are designed to work together. And so we're seeing more and more need to provide training for your team relative to these solutions. Once you figure out how they fit you and how they should to leverage them to work for you, make sure you train your team to be able to use them. So this is, we've been doing this. Again, it's not a must-have, because we don't want to tell your organization that you have to work on productivity or collaboration. I'm not sure how well you feel you do in that regard. However, this is something that we're seeing many organizations work on in the last couple of years, and we do expect this is going to be a continued trend over the coming several years. And we didn't want to leave this presentation from a forecast perspective without at least sharing that this is a big deal. All right, so in summary, the 2023 must-haves. Look, multi-factor, endpoint detection and response, cyber liability insurance, and incident response. Those four, if you don't have those yet, or any of even one of those yet, put it on your list for next year. As you're going into your 2023 planning, make sure you have these four things in place. From on the horizon honorable mention perspective, there's a couple that are applicable to security. Application vulnerability management. As I mentioned, this is Mytech is rolling out tools next year. So our clients that are on our Smart Business Suite program will already have these pieces in place. Our clients also already have the endpoint detection and response pieces in place. And we're also hosting incident response plan workshops. So we're helping our clients with all those policies. We're not a liability and cyber liability insurance provider, so we can't help with number 3 over there. But finally, then on the operational side, really working on collaboration and productivity improvements. So that's what we see looking into the next couple of years. We hope this makes sense and resonates with you. We're able to help with a lot of these, or at least share with what we're seeing on the forecast side. So thank you very much for attending. I'll tell you, please, for future events, we like us or follow our LinkedIn or subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is where we post all this information. If you know anybody that can benefit from this information, please share it. We have future events at mytech.com/events. We have our November Teams Basics session scheduled, as well as we have in-person client immersion or cloud immersion experience events for Colorado and Minnesota in November. And then stay tuned, 2023, where in-person workshops are coming back. So we're looking forward to seeing you all in person as well as virtually going into next year. All right, with that said, thank you all so much for listening, for attending. Hopefully this information was valuable. And I'd like to, for those of you who need to drop off, thanks for watching. For those of you who want to stick around and ask any questions, let's open it up for some questions. Stephanie?